The morning Yates Young found the child shivering beneath his porch, clutching a tattered cloth doll. He had no idea that his carefully ordered bachelor life was about to change forever. He'd been living alone on his ranch outside Weaverville, California for the better part of 3 years, content with his cattle, his 2 horses, and the peaceful rhythm of solitary work. The year was 1878, and Yates had carved out a decent living from the unforgiving land, building his spread from nothing after leaving Texas behind. At 26, he'd seen enough hardship to appreciate quiet days and predictable routines. But there was nothing predictable about the little girl curled up like a wounded animal beneath the weathered boards of his front porch. "Hey there," Yates said softly, crouching down to peer into the shadows. "You lost, little one." The child couldn't have been more than 4 years old, with tangled dark hair and enormous brown eyes that watched him with the wariness of a wild creature. Her dress was torn, caked with dust and what looked like dried mud. She clutched the doll tighter and pressed herself further back against the foundation stones. Yates sat down on the steps, making himself less threatening. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name's Yates. What's yours?" Silence. The child's lower lip trembled, but she didn't make a sound. "You hungry?" He kept his voice gentle, the same tone he used with skittish horses. "I was just about to make some breakfast. Got eggs, bacon, fresh bread from town yesterday." Still nothing, though he saw her swallow hard at the mention of food. "Tell you what," Yates said, standing slowly. "I'm going to go inside and cook up that breakfast. If you want to come in and eat, the door will be open. If you don't, that's fine too, but I'll leave a plate out here for you either way." He went inside, leaving the door ajar as promised, and set about preparing a hearty meal. Through the window, he could see the edge of the porch but not the space beneath it. As bacon sizzled in the cast iron skillet and filled the house with its rich aroma, Yates wondered where the child had come from. Weaverville wasn't large, but it had grown considerably since the mining boom. Plenty of desperate folks passed through, some running from trouble, others running toward hope that never materialized. He was just plating the food when he heard the tentative creak of a floorboard behind him. Yates didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge the small presence in his doorway. Instead, he set 2 plates on the rough-hewn table and poured 2 glasses of milk from the pitcher in his cold box. "Sit wherever you like," he said casually, settling into his usual chair and beginning to eat. From the corner of his eye, he watched the little girl edge into the room. She clutched her doll in one hand, the other reaching out to steady herself against the wall. Her eyes darted around the cabin, taking in the simple furnishings, the stone fireplace, the curtainless windows that let in the morning sun. Finally, hunger won out over caution. She climbed into the chair across from him and began eating with the desperate intensity of someone who hadn't seen food in days. Yates kept his own pace steady, not wanting to make her self-conscious. When she'd cleared her plate and drained her glass, she finally spoke. "Emma, that your name?" Yates asked, keeping his tone easy. She nodded, hugging the doll close. "That's a pretty name. And who's your friend there, Molly?" The child's voice was barely above a whisper. "Nice to meet you both." Yates collected the plates and brought them to the wash basin. "Emma, where's your mama?" The little girl's face crumpled, and tears began streaming down her dirty cheeks. "Don't know. We were on the wagon and there were bad men and Mama told me to run and hide and not come out no matter what, and I ran and I couldn't find her and it got dark and I was scared." Yates felt his chest tighten. He knelt beside her chair, careful not to crowd her. "When did this happen?" "I don't know," she hiccuped through her tears. "Lots of sleeps ago, maybe 3. I hid during the day and walked when it was cooler. I ate berries. 3 days." This child had been alone and terrified for 3 days. Yates' jaw tightened as anger flared in his gut, not at Emma, but at whatever circumstances had put her in this position. "You're safe now," he told her firmly. "Nobody's going to hurt you here, I promise." Over the next few days, Yates learned more about Emma's situation in bits and pieces. Her mother's name was Josephine Daniels. They'd been traveling north from Sacramento with a small group of settlers when they were attacked. Emma couldn't say much about what happened, just that there had been shouting and gunfire, and her mother had shoved her into some brush with desperate instructions to run. Yates rode into Weaverville and spoke with Sheriff Morrison, a grizzled man in his 50s who'd seen just about everything. Morrison confirmed that a wagon had been found burned out about 15 miles south, 2 men dead, but no woman matching Josephine's description. No child either, which meant Emma had followed her mother's instructions perfectly. "Could be she was taken," Morrison said grimly. "Could be she got away on foot, hard to say. I'll send word to the surrounding towns, see if anyone matching her description turns up." "And the girl?" Yates asked. "You willing to keep her for now?" Yates thought about his quiet life, his simple routines. Then he thought about Emma's enormous eyes and the way she'd clung to his leg that morning when he tried to leave for morning chores. "Yeah, I'll keep her." "Good man. If we find the mother, we'll let you know. If not." Morrison shrugged. "Well, that girl could do worse than landing with someone decent." Back at the ranch, Yates found Emma right where he'd left her, sitting on the porch with Molly the doll, watching the road with heartbreaking hope in her eyes. "Any sign of my mama?" she asked immediately. "Not yet, sweetheart. But the sheriff's looking. In the meantime, how about we get you properly settled?" Settling Emma proved more challenging than breaking a wild Mustang. She was terrified of being alone, which meant Yates couldn't leave her in the house while he worked. He fashioned a sling from canvas and carried her on his back like a papoose while he did chores, talking to her constantly about what he was doing. She was dead weight at first, silent and withdrawn, but gradually she began asking questions. "Why are you fixing the fence?" "Because cattle aren't too bright. They'll wander right off if there's a gap, and then I have to spend all day finding them again." "Why?" "Because they're my livelihood. I sell them for money, and money lets me buy things we need. Like food, exactly like food. And dresses." Yates glanced at her torn, stained dress. "Yeah, we probably should get you some new clothes." The next trip to town included a stop at the general store, where Mrs. Chen helped pick out 2 serviceable dresses, a nightgown, and proper shoes to replace Emma's worn-through boots. Emma clutched each item like treasure, her eyes wide with disbelief that they were really for her. "Say thank you to Mr. Young," Mrs. Chen prompted gently. "Thank you," Emma whispered, then surprised Yates by wrapping her small arms around his leg in a fierce hug. Something shifted in his chest at that gesture, something he didn't have words for. This child had been through hell and was still capable of gratitude, still capable of trust. It humbled him. Weeks turned into months. Summer heat gave way to autumn coolness. Emma grew more comfortable, laughing more easily, helping with simple chores like collecting eggs and feeding the chickens. She still asked about her mama every few days, and Yates always answered honestly. No news yet, but people were still looking. In truth, he'd begun to lose hope that Josephine Daniels would ever be found. Too much time had passed. If she'd been taken by raiders, she could be anywhere. If she died in the wilderness, her body might never be discovered. It was a harsh reality, but the West didn't traffic in gentle truths. Yates found himself growing attached to the little girl, looking forward to her constant chatter, and the way she made even mundane tasks feel like adventures. She'd sleep in his arms when nightmares woke her, and he'd sing the half-remembered songs his own mother had sung years ago. He taught her numbers by counting cattle, letters by reading from his one precious book of poetry. She was bright and eager to learn, soaking up knowledge like parched earth soaking up rain. By December, when the first snow dusted the mountains surrounding Weaverville, Emma had been with him for 5 months. She no longer watched the road with quite the same intensity, though he caught her looking sometimes, hope and sorrow warring in her young face. Then, on a bitter cold morning just before Christmas, everything changed again. Yates was splitting wood behind the house when he heard horse hooves on the frozen ground. He straightened, axe in hand, and watched a lone rider approach. The figure was bundled against the cold, but as they drew closer, Yates could see it was a woman, swaying dangerously in the saddle. The horse stopped at the edge of the yard, and the woman tried to dismount but simply fell instead, collapsing in a heap on the hard ground. Yates dropped the axe and ran. "Emma, stay in the house," he shouted, knowing she was watching from the window as she always did. He reached the fallen rider and carefully turned her over. The face that looked up at him was gaunt and scarred, but the bone structure was delicate, the eyes a striking hazel even clouded with pain and exhaustion. Her dark hair was matted and dull, her clothes little better than rags despite the heavy coat she'd obviously acquired somewhere. "Please," she whispered. "My daughter, Emma. Dark hair, 4 years old. She was with the wagon train. Have you seen her? Have you heard anything?" Yates felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "You're Josephine Daniels." Hope flared so bright in those hazel eyes that it hurt to witness. "You know where she is? Is she alive? Please, I've been searching every town, every ranch, every mining camp. Please tell me she's alive." "She's alive," Yates said quickly. "She's here. She's safe." The woman made a sound that was half sob, half prayer, and then promptly fainted. Yates carried her into the house, shouldering through the door to find Emma frozen in the middle of the room, her eyes huge with recognition and disbelief. "Mama!" The word was barely a breath. "It's her," Yates confirmed, carrying Josephine to his bed, the only proper bed in the house. "She's sick and exhausted, but she's alive." Emma burst into tears and would have climbed right up onto the bed if Yates hadn't caught her gently. "Let's let your mama rest a bit first, okay? She's been through a lot trying to find you. But she's really here. She's really alive. She's really here." Emma clung to him, sobbing with relief, while Yates assessed Josephine's condition with growing concern. She was severely malnourished, suffering from exposure, and that scar on her face looked recent and poorly healed. He could see other injuries too, marks that suggested violence and hardship. Whatever had happened to her after the attack, it hadn't been good. He spent the rest of the day tending to her while Emma hovered nearby, alternating between tears and nervous chatter. Yates cleaned the worst of the wounds, got some broth and water into Josephine during brief periods of consciousness, and kept the fire built up to combat the fever he could feel setting in. It was 3 days before Josephine was truly awake and coherent. 3 days of fever dreams where she called out for Emma. 3 days of Yates and Emma taking turns keeping watch. 3 days of uncertainty about whether this woman would survive her ordeal. But she was strong. On the 4th morning, Yates woke from his dozing position in the chair beside the bed to find hazel eyes watching him with clear awareness. "You're the one who has my daughter," Josephine said. Her voice was rough but steady. "Yes, madam. Name's Yates Young. Emma's been safe here since July." "It's December now." A statement, not a question, heavy with the weight of lost time. "Yes, madam. Call me Josephine, please." She tried to sit up and winced. "Where is she?" "Sleeping in the loft. She's been right here beside you as much as I'd let her. Nearly had to tie her down to make her sleep in a proper bed last night." Josephine's eyes filled with tears. "I thought I'd never see her again. They took me, the raiders who attacked us. Kept me for weeks before I managed to escape. I've been searching for 5 months." 5 months not knowing if she was alive or dead. She looked at him directly. "Thank you for taking her in, for keeping her safe." "Didn't really have a choice," Yates said gruffly, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Couldn't exactly leave a 4-year-old to fend for herself." "You'd be surprised what people can do." Bitterness edged her voice. "Or maybe you wouldn't." Before Yates could respond, there was a thump from the loft followed by rapid footsteps on the ladder. Emma appeared, still in her nightgown, her hair wild from sleep. She saw her mother awake and let out a squeal of pure joy. "Mama, baby girl." Josephine opened her arms, and Emma flew into them, both of them crying and laughing and holding each other like they'd never let go. Yates slipped outside to give them privacy, his own throat tight with emotion. He busied himself with morning chores, giving mother and daughter time to reunite. When he came back an hour later with fresh eggs, he found them still curled together in the bed, Emma chattering away about everything that had happened since they'd been separated. "And Yates taught me my letters," Emma was saying. "And I can count to 50 now, and I help with the chickens every morning, and he lets me ride Copper sometimes when we check the fences, and he makes really good biscuits and—" Josephine listened with a soft smile, her hand stroking Emma's hair over and over, as if reassuring herself that the child was real. When she looked up and caught Yates watching from the doorway, her expression shifted to something complicated, grateful and sad, and a dozen other things he couldn't quite name. Over the next week, as Josephine's strength slowly returned, the three of them settled into an awkward routine. Josephine was up and moving within days, despite Yates' protests that she needed more rest. She insisted on helping where she could, though he could see it pained her to be so weak, so dependent. "I've been taking care of myself since I was 16, she said when he tried to get her to sit back down after she'd nearly collapsed doing dishes. "I'm not good at being useless." "You're not useless. You're recovering from serious injuries and months of hardship. There's a difference." She looked at him with those sharp hazel eyes. "How old are you, Yates Young?" 26. "Why? Just trying to figure you out. Most men your age, especially out here, they're not exactly the nurturing type. Had a good mother before she passed. Taught me right." He took the dish towel from her hands. "Now sit before you fall down." She sat, but not because he'd told her to. Her jaw was set in a stubborn line that reminded him forcibly of Emma when she didn't want to do something. "I need to figure out what comes next. I can't stay here indefinitely. It wouldn't be proper, and besides, I need to find work, get back on my feet." "It's December," Yates pointed out. "Not exactly prime time for a woman recovering from captivity and exposure to be job hunting. Spring comes, we'll talk about it. I won't be your charity case. Didn't say you were." He met her eyes steadily. "But Emma's been through enough upheaval. Let's give her a stable Christmas at least before we start making plans." Josephine looked away, but he saw her swallow hard. "Christmas? I don't even have anything to give her. She's got you back." That's the only present she wanted. As Christmas approached, Yates found himself noticing things about Josephine that had nothing to do with her injuries or her situation. The way morning light caught in her dark hair when she sat by the window mending clothes. The soft lullabies she sang to Emma at night, her voice surprisingly lovely. The intelligence in her eyes when they talked after Emma was asleep, discussing everything from politics to poetry. She told him more of her story in pieces. She'd been married young, widowed at 20 when her husband died in a mining accident. She was 24 now, had been trying to make a fresh start in Oregon when the attack happened. The raiders had planned to sell her to a brothel, but she'd managed to steal a knife, kill one of her captors, and escape during a supply stop in a small town. She'd worked odd jobs under a false name for months, saving every penny to buy a horse and supplies so she could search for Emma properly. I kept thinking she was dead, Josephine admitted one night, staring into the fire. Everyone I asked said there were no survivors from our wagon train, except the 2 men who died in the initial attack and weren't found until later. But I couldn't stop looking. Couldn't give up on the possibility even when it seemed impossible. Mother's love, Yates said quietly. Strongest force I know. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he felt something shift between them, something beyond gratitude or simple companionship. It was there in the way her eyes softened, the way the corner of her mouth lifted in an almost smile. You're a good man, Yates Young, better than most I've known. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and added another log to the fire. Christmas morning came with fresh snow and Emma's delighted squeals. Yates had carved her a proper doll cradle for Molly and bought peppermint sticks in town. Josephine had somehow managed to sew a new dress for the doll from scraps, her hands still clumsy from injury, but determined. Emma was ecstatic, convinced it was the best Christmas ever, watching Josephine smile as their daughter played. Yates felt something dangerous bloom in his chest. Want. Not just physical attraction, though he'd be lying if he said he didn't notice how beautiful she was even with healing scars and 2 thin cheeks. But deeper than that. He wanted her laughter in his house, wanted to see her across the breakfast table every morning. Wanted to help her chase away the shadows that still haunted her eyes. It was a fool's want. She'd made it clear she planned to leave come spring, to find work and rebuild her independence. A woman like Josephine Daniels, who'd survived what she'd survived, wasn't looking for another man to depend on. She was looking for freedom, but knowing that didn't stop his heart from hoping. January and February passed in a blur of cold and routine. Josephine grew stronger, more like herself, whoever that was. She had a sharp wit and didn't suffer fools. She could shoot, too, which surprised him until she reminded him she'd been a widow living alone before deciding to head north. She practiced with his rifle, her aim improving daily as her hands grew steadier. Need to be able to protect myself, she said when he asked why she was so determined. And Emma, never again will I be helpless. They fell into comfortable patterns. Josephine took over the cooking and household tasks, insisting she needed to contribute. Emma blossomed with both adults in her life, more confident and joyful than Yates had ever seen her. In the evenings, the 3 of them would sit by the fire, Emma between them, listening to stories or working on lessons. It felt like a family. Felt like something Yates hadn't known he wanted until it was right there in front of him. He was pretty sure Josephine felt it too, though neither of them spoke of it. There were moments when their hands would brush, and she wouldn't pull away immediately. Times when he'd catch her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Once when he'd come back from town through a sudden snowstorm, half frozen and exhausted, she'd helped him out of his wet clothes with an intimacy that felt like more than simple kindness, her hands gentle and lingering. But she never said anything, and neither did he. The unspoken agreement seemed to be that they'd maintain this careful distance, this friendship that could have been more if circumstances were different. March brought the first hints of thaw, and with it, Josephine's restlessness returned. She started talking about opportunities in town, about finding work as a seamstress or a cook. Mrs. Chen at the general store had mentioned needing help. It wouldn't pay much, but it would be a start. Emma could stay with you during the day at first, Josephine said one evening, her voice carefully neutral. Until I can afford a place of our own. I'd pay you, of course, for her room and board. Yates felt something cold settle in his stomach. That's not necessary. It is to me. She met his eyes across the table, Emma already asleep in the loft. You've done so much for us, too much. It's time we stopped being a burden. You're not a burden. The words came out harder than he'd intended. "Either of you. Yates." She said his name gently, like she was trying to soften a blow. "We can't stay here forever, you know that. It's not proper, and besides, you have your own life to live. You didn't sign up for an instant family." "What if I wanted to?" The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Josephine stared at him, her face going through a dozen emotions too fast to track. "What?" Yates stood, needing to move to do something with the nervous energy coursing through him. "I know I'm probably speaking out of turn. I know you've got plans and you're not looking for another husband, but these past months, having you both here, it's been the best time of my life. I look forward to waking up in the morning. I love hearing Emma's laugh and your singing. I love talking to you at night. I love it, all of it." "Yates," she sounded shaken. "I'm not asking you to marry me," he said quickly, though part of him wanted to do exactly that. "I'm just saying you don't have to leave, either of you. If you want to stay, there's room here. There's a place for you both for as long as you want it." Josephine stood too, her hands twisted together in front of her. "You don't understand. I can't just be someone's charity case, someone's burden. I did that in my first marriage. My husband was a good man, but he never let me forget that he'd rescued me from poverty, that I owed him for his generosity. I won't live like that again." "Then don't." Yates took a step closer, close enough to see the rapid pulse in her throat. "Live like a partner, an equal. Work the ranch with me if that's what you want. Or do your sewing in town and come home to a place that's yours. Not mine, ours. I'm not trying to own you, Josephine. I'm trying to tell you that I've fallen in love with you, and if there's any chance you might feel the same, I want to explore that. Together." She was crying now, silent tears tracking down her scarred cheek. "I'm broken," she whispered. "What they did to me, what I went through, it broke something inside. Some days I can barely stand to be touched. Some nights I have dreams so bad I wake up screaming. You don't want that. You don't want me. I want exactly you." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I don't care about broken. Everything worth having gets broken sometimes. What matters is whether you're willing to put the pieces back together. And if I can't, then I'll help you carry the pieces." She let out a shaky laugh. "That's the most ridiculous, romantic thing I've ever heard. Is it working?" She looked up at him, searching his face for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her, because she leaned in, slowly, cautiously, and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, almost chaste, but it felt like a promise. When she pulled back, her eyes were still wet, but she was smiling. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted. "Be someone's partner, trust someone that much again, but I want to try. With you, I want to try. That's all I'm asking." They stood there in the firelight, foreheads touching, breathing each other's air. Outside, the last of winter's snow was melting, and spring was coming with all its possibilities. Emma's sleepy voice drifted down from the loft. "Are you going to be my papa now?" Yates and Josephine broke apart, both looking up to find the little girl peering over the edge of the loft, her hair sticking up at wild angles. "I thought you were asleep," Josephine said, trying to sound stern but failing to hide her smile. "I was. But then I heard talking." Emma climbed down the ladder with the fearless confidence of a child who'd done it 100 times. "So are you going to be my papa?" Yates looked at Josephine, who nodded, her eyes shining. He crouched down to Emma's level. "Would you like that?" Emma threw her arms around his neck with enough force to nearly knock him over. "Yes, I told Molly you would be. She said I should just ask, but I wanted to wait for Mama to decide too." "Well, Molly sounds very wise," Yates said, hugging the little girl close. Over her head, he met Josephine's eyes and saw his own happiness reflected there. They decided to marry in April, a simple ceremony in Weaverville's small church with Sheriff Morrison and Mrs. Chen as witnesses. Emma wore a new dress Josephine had made, white with yellow flowers, and carried a bouquet of early wildflowers. Josephine wore a dress borrowed from Mrs. Chen, pale blue that brought out the green in her hazel eyes. Yates wore his best shirt and actually brushed his hair, which made Emma giggle. The ceremony itself was brief. Reverend Thomas kept it simple, speaking of commitment and partnership and the family being formed. When Yates kissed his bride, Emma clapped so enthusiastically that the few other attendees laughed. The celebration afterward at the ranch was equally simple. Just the three of them, plus a few neighbors who'd become friends. Someone brought a fiddle, and there was dancing in the yard as the sun set. Yates danced with his new wife, then with his new daughter, feeling lighter than he had in years. That night after Emma was asleep, Yates and Josephine stood together on the porch, looking out at the land that was now truly theirs together. "Scared?" Yates asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Terrified," Josephine admitted, "but also happy. I didn't think I'd ever feel this again. Safe." "Hopeful? You feel safe with me?" She turned to look at him in the moonlight. "I feel safe with you." He kissed her then, deeper than that first tentative kiss by the fire, and felt her respond with growing confidence. When they finally went inside to the room that was now theirs to share, there was nervousness on both sides, but also trust. Whatever scars they both carried, whatever fears lingered, they would face them together. The first year of their marriage had its challenges. Josephine did have nightmares, terrible ones that left her shaking and unable to be touched. Yates learned to wake her gently, to give her space until she came back to herself, to hold her when she was ready. He had his own moments too, times when the loneliness of his past years would creep up on him, making him quiet and withdrawn. Josephine learned to recognize those moods, to draw him out with patient conversation or comfortable silence. Emma thrived, growing taller and more confident. She called Yates Papa without hesitation, and the love between them was as real as any biological bond. She helped more around the ranch, learning to ride properly and even helping with the cattle. At 6, she was already showing signs of the strong woman she'd become. 2 years into their marriage, Josephine announced she was pregnant. Yates was thrilled, though worried for her health given everything she'd been through. But Josephine was stronger than either of them had realized. She worked right up until the last weeks, refusing to be coddled. Their son was born on a warm September evening, with Mrs. Chen acting as midwife and Emma waiting anxiously outside with Sheriff Morrison. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and when Yates finally held his son for the first time, a squalling red-faced infant with a surprisingly loud voice, he felt something settle in his soul. Completeness. They named him Thomas, after Josephine's late father, and from the moment Emma met her baby brother, she was smitten. She helped with everything, learning to change diapers and make bottles, singing to him when he cried. Life settled into new rhythms. The ranch prospered, growing from Yates' original modest operation into something more substantial. Josephine's skill with sewing brought in additional income, her reputation for fine work spreading throughout the region. Emma started proper school in town, riding in with Yates twice a week and staying with Mrs. Chen on those nights, coming home full of stories about her lessons and friends. When Thomas was 2, Josephine got pregnant again, and this time they had a daughter. She came into the world with less fuss than her brother, a calm baby with her mother's hazel eyes. They named her Rose, and she fit into their family as if there had always been a space waiting just for her. Emma was 8 by then, remarkably good with both younger children. She'd inherited her mother's intelligence and her father's steady temperament, though Yates always thought of himself as her father now, with no qualifier needed. Blood didn't make a family. Love did. The years passed with the usual mix of joy and hardship. There were difficult winters and dry summers. Cattle got sick. Equipment broke. Thomas had a terrifying bout with fever when he was 4 that had them all praying. Rose fell from a horse at 6 and broke her arm. Emma, at 14, developed a crush on the blacksmith's son that kept Josephine and Yates up at night worrying, though it turned out to be harmless. Through it all, Yates and Josephine grew deeper in love. The passion of those early years matured into something richer, more complex. They knew each other's moods and needs without speaking, could work side by side all day and still want to talk at night, had learned how to fight fair and make up thoroughly. "Do you ever regret it?" Josephine asked one evening when they were alone, the children all finally asleep. Taking Emma in that day, everything that came after, Yates pulled her closer on the porch swing he'd built a few years back. "That's like asking if I regret breathing. You and the kids, you're not something that happened to me. You're my life, the only one I want." She smiled and kissed him. Good answer. Emma grew into a stunning young woman, graduating from the small school in Weaverville at 16 with honors. She had opportunities to go east for further education, but chose to stay and help on the ranch, at least for a while. She had her mother's independence and her father's love of the land, and Yates couldn't have been prouder. When she was 18, she did start courting the blacksmith's son, James, who'd grown into a hard-working young man with genuine respect for Emma's intelligence and spirit. Yates liked him, which was good because Emma clearly intended to marry him eventually. But she wasn't rushing, wanted to be sure, and both Yates and Josephine supported that caution. Thomas became the ranch's best rider, fearless with the horses and cattle. At 10, he could do the work of a grown man when needed, though Yates was careful not to push him too hard. Let the boy have a childhood, something Yates himself hadn't always had. Rose was the scholar of the family, always reading, always asking questions. At 8, she announced she wanted to be a teacher when she grew up, and Yates suspected she'd do it too. She had that determined set to her jaw that reminded him so much of Josephine. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates took Josephine to Sacramento for a week, leaving the children with Emma in charge and Sheriff Morrison checking in daily. It was the first time they'd been truly alone since Emma had first arrived all those years ago. They stayed in a real hotel, ate in restaurants, walked through shops and talked for hours without interruption. It felt like a luxury, but more than that, it felt like a reaffirmation of who they were beyond just parents and ranchers. They were Yates and Josephine, 2 people who'd found each other against all odds and built something beautiful. "I love you," Josephine said on their last night in the city, lying in his arms in the unfamiliar hotel bed. "I don't say it enough, but I do. You saved me in more ways than just taking Emma in. You gave me back my life." "You saved yourself," Yates countered. "I just gave you a place to land." Still, she propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "I want you to know. If I could go back and change anything, if I could undo all the pain and hardship, I wouldn't. Because it brought me to you, and nothing is worth more than that." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and showed her without words how much he felt the same. When they returned to the ranch, they found everything running smoothly. Emma had handled a dozen small crises with competence, Thomas had kept up with all the chores, and Rose had apparently reorganized the entire pantry for fun. Their family was strong, capable, and full of love. Life continued its steady forward march. Emma married James when she was 20, a beautiful ceremony at the ranch with half of Weaverville in attendance. They built a house on the far edge of Yates' property, James setting up a small forge there while still helping his father in town. Within a year, Emma was pregnant with their first child, making Yates and Josephine grandparents at the relatively young ages of 38 and 36, respectively. Thomas, at 14, was already taller than Yates and showing signs he'd be even bigger. He'd developed a talent for training horses, able to gentle even the wildest Mustang with patience and kindness. Ranchers from all over the region started bringing him problem horses, and soon he had his own thriving business running alongside the cattle operation. Rose, at 12, did indeed become obsessed with teaching. She helped at the schoolhouse whenever she could, tutoring younger children and proving to have a real gift for making complicated subjects understandable. She talked constantly about going to normal school, getting her teaching certificate, making a real difference. "All three of them are going to be just fine," Josephine said one evening, watching their children work together to mend a fence. Well, their two youngest children. Emma was home with her baby daughter now, a squalling infant named Lily who had her mother's determination and her father's gentle nature. "Better than fine," Yates agreed. "They're going to be extraordinary." Well, they had good examples. She bumped his shoulder with hers. "You talking about us?" "I'm talking about their mother," Josephine said with a grin. "Who taught them about strength and resilience and never giving up? And their father who taught them about kindness and hard work and terrible jokes." She laughed, the sound as beautiful to him now as it had been that first time he'd coaxed it from her all those years ago. "Your jokes aren't that terrible, liar." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they'd built a life on. 15 years since that morning Yates had found Emma under his porch. 15 years of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle, all of it worth it because they'd faced it together. "You remember what you said to me?" Josephine asked suddenly. "That night when you told me you loved me." "I said a lot of things. You said you'd help me carry the pieces if I couldn't put them back together myself." She looked at him, her eyes bright. "I want you to know I'm not broken anymore. You helped me heal, Yates. You and Emma and this life we've built. I'm whole again." Yates felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You were always whole, Josephine. You just needed time to see it." "Maybe." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "But I'm glad I had you by my side while I figured it out." Inside the house, they could hear Rose calling that dinner was ready, Thomas laughing at something. The normal sounds of a family going about their evening. It was everything Yates had never known he wanted, all given to him by a scared little girl who'd hidden under his porch one July morning, and the brave, beautiful woman who'd come looking for her. More years passed, each one adding new layers to their story. Emma had 2 more children, boys this time, twins who kept her and James running. Thomas eventually married a rancher's daughter from the next county over, a practical woman named Sarah who loved horses as much as he did. They built their house on another corner of the expanding property, and soon there were more grandchildren running around. Rose went off to normal school in San Francisco when she was 18, the first of their children to leave home for any extended period. It was hard on everyone, especially Josephine, but they were proud too. She came back 2 years later with her teaching certificate and immediately got a position at the Weaverville school. Within 5 years, she was running the whole institution, her reputation as an excellent educator spreading far and wide. She eventually married too, though later than her siblings, at 27. Her husband was a lawyer who'd moved to Weaverville to open a practice, a thoughtful man who loved that his wife was smarter than him and never tried to diminish her accomplishments. Yates liked him immediately. By the time Yates was 50, he had 7 grandchildren with another on the way, a thriving ranch that employed several hands, and a wife he loved more with each passing day. His hair was going gray, his joints complained more in cold weather, but he'd never felt richer. "We did good," Josephine said one evening. They were sitting on that same porch swing watching yet another sunset. It had become their tradition, this quiet time together at the end of each day. "We did," Yates agreed. "Though most of the credit goes to you, that's not true." "It is." He squeezed her hand. "You raised Emma while dealing with your own trauma. You helped build this ranch into what it is. You gave birth to and raised two more amazing children. You've been the backbone of this family from the start. And you've been its heart." She brought his hand to her lips and kissed it. "Don't sell yourself short, Yates Young. You're the best man I've ever known." They sat in comfortable silence until Josephine suddenly chuckled. "What?" Yates asked. "I was just thinking about that first morning. When Emma came in so scared she wouldn't even speak. And you just calmly made breakfast like having a strange child in your house was the most normal thing in the world." "Didn't know what else to do," Yates admitted. "Figured she needed food more than questions. And then I showed up, half dead and desperate, and you just took that in stride too. What was I supposed to do? Turn you away? Most men would have." Her voice grew serious. "Most men would have kept Emma, sent me packing, said it was inappropriate or improper. Or they would have used the situation to their advantage, demanded things in exchange for helping. Then most men are fools." She looked at him with such love it took his breath away, even after all these years. "I thank God every day that you're not most men." As they grew older, Yates and Josephine gradually turned more of the ranch operations over to Thomas and James, though neither fully retired. Yates still loved working with the horses, and Josephine still kept meticulous books and managed the household. But they had more time for themselves, for the grandchildren, for simply being together. Emma's oldest, Lily, turned out to be a carbon copy of her grandmother, with the same hazel eyes and determination. At 16, she announced she wanted to be a doctor, which caused quite a stir since there were few female doctors anywhere, let alone in small California towns. But Josephine encouraged her, told her about her own struggles to be seen as an equal, and helped her find a path forward. The twins, Michael and Matthew, were terrors who somehow managed to be charming enough that they always got away with their mischief. They worked alongside their father in the forge and were developing real skill with metalwork. Thomas and Sarah's 3 children were quieter, more studious like their Aunt Rose. The oldest, Margaret, had her father's way with horses but her mother's head for business. She talked about expanding the horse training operation, maybe even breeding specialized stock. Yates thought she'd probably do it too. Rose and her husband David had 2 children, both girls, who were being raised with books and education and endless opportunities. Yates loved watching them grow up in a world that was slowly becoming more open to women's potential. On Yates' 55th birthday, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. All 3 of his children, all 7 grandchildren plus the 3 most recent additions, making 10 in total. The house was full of noise and laughter and love. Emma, now 33 and still beautiful despite the years and childbearing, pulled him aside at one point. "I need to tell you something." "What's wrong?" Yates asked immediately, reading concern in her face. "Nothing's wrong, the opposite." She took his hand. "I need to thank you. I know I've said it before, but I don't think you fully understand what you gave me. You didn't just take in a scared little girl. You gave me a life, a family, a father who loved me unconditionally. Everything good I have, every bit of happiness, it all started that morning when you found me under your porch." Yates felt tears prick his eyes. "Emma, sweetheart, you don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do, because I'm old enough now to understand how rare you are. How many men would have done what you did, not just taking me in but loving me like your own, letting Mama into your heart even though it complicated everything? She hugged him tight. You're my papa, the only one I've ever known or wanted, and I love you so much. I love you too, little one. He held her close, this woman who'd once been a terrified child. You and your Mama, you're the best things that ever happened to me. Later that night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Yates and Josephine sat on their swing one more time. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Emma had hidden somewhere else that morning? Josephine asked. I try not to, Yates admitted. Scares me too much to think about. What if she died out there? What if you'd never found her? What if you'd found her but she'd been with someone who didn't care? But she didn't. She found you, and then I found you both. Josephine laid her head on his shoulder. I don't believe in much, but I believe in that we were meant to find each other. That all the pain and hardship led us to exactly where we were supposed to be. Together. Together, she agreed. They grew old together, Yates and Josephine, surrounded by their ever-expanding family. Yates' hair went completely white, and his back developed a permanent stoop from decades of ranch work. Josephine's scars faded to silver lines, her hands growing gnarled with arthritis but no less capable. Emma took over much of the household management as her mother slowed down, though Josephine fought every concession to age. Thomas ran the ranch with skill and wisdom, expanding it further while maintaining the values his parents had instilled. Rose became one of the most respected educators in Northern California, and her daughters followed in her footsteps. The grandchildren grew up, had children of their own. Great-grandchildren who called Yates Papa Yates and crawled all over him despite his protests that he was too old and creaky for such treatment. He loved every minute of it. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Yates and Josephine renewed their vows in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Emma stood up as her mother's attendant, Thomas as his father's. Rose read a poem she'd written about love that lasted 30 years, Josephine marveled that night. When I collapsed in your yard that day, I never imagined this, that I'd have 30 years of happiness, of love, of peace. 30 down, Yates said. 30 more to go, she laughed. I don't think we'll make it to 94 and 92, my love. Why not? Too stubborn to die, both of us. Maybe, she kissed him gently. But either way, however long we have, I'm grateful for all of it, every single day. They didn't make it to 60 years, as it turned out. Yates passed away at 71 on a warm spring morning with Josephine holding his hand. His heart simply stopped, the doctor said. No pain, no suffering. Just one moment there, the next gone. The funeral was enormous, attended by everyone whose lives Yates had touched over the years. They buried him on the ranch, on a hill overlooking the land he'd loved and worked his whole life. Josephine stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and spoke the eulogy herself despite their protests that she didn't have to. Yates Young was the best man I ever knew, she said, her voice strong despite her tears. He had a gift for seeing what people needed and providing it without expectation of return. He took in a scared child and loved her as his own. He took in a broken woman and helped her heal. He built a family not through blood but through choice, through daily acts of kindness and love. The world is lesser without him, but so much richer for having had him at all. She lived another 5 years after Yates passed, staying active and sharp until the very end. She was surrounded by family constantly, never alone unless she chose to be. But those who knew her best could see the part of her that was simply waiting, counting down the days until she could be with her husband again. When Josephine died at 76, peacefully in her sleep, Emma found a letter on her bedside table addressed to all of them. My darling children, it read in Josephine's familiar handwriting. If you're reading this, I'm with your father again, which is exactly where I want to be. Don't mourn too long or too hard. I lived a full, beautiful life, so much more than I ever dreamed possible. I want you to remember that family is what you make it. Emma, you were my daughter from the moment I saw you again in Yates' house, and that never changed. Thomas and Rose, you were gifts I never expected but treasured every day. And all of you have given me grandchildren and great-grandchildren who fill my heart with joy. Remember your father and me, but don't cling to grief. We had our time and it was wonderful, and now you have yours. Live fully. Love deeply. Take in the strays and the broken ones like we did, because you never know which scared child under a porch or desperate woman on a horse might become the greatest blessing of your life. All my love, always and forever. Mama. They buried her next to Yates, under the same oak tree, with a single headstone that read, Yates Young and Josephine Daniels Young, together forever as they were always meant to be. Emma, now 56, stood at her parents' grave with her own children and grandchildren around her. She thought about that terrified little girl hiding under a porch, clutching a rag doll, certain she'd never see her mother again. Thought about the man who'd taken her in without hesitation, who'd fed her and kept her safe and loved her unconditionally. Thank you, she whispered, speaking to both of them, for everything, for showing me what love really means, for building this family, for being exactly who you were. The wind rustled through the oak leaves, and for a moment, Emma could have sworn she heard her father's laugh and her mother's voice, young again and filled with joy. She smiled through her tears, knowing they were together again, knowing that the love they'd built would continue in their children and their children's children, spreading out like ripples on a pond, touching more lives than they could have ever imagined. And it had all started with a simple act of kindness on a July morning long ago, when a cowboy had looked under his porch and found not just a child, but his entire future waiting to begin.